Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 1988 film Child's Play, and I know someone who's going to be very excited about this review. That is your friendly neighborhood Uncle Pete. He's the biggest Chucky fan, huge Chucky fan. If you haven't seen his videos, every video he does, he has a bunch of Chucky stuff behind him. So this is something I've been working on in secrecy. I purchased this a few months back and thought, I'm going to review all of these, which that is the plan. I'm not just doing this original Child's Play. I'm going to do all 7 of the movies in the franchise, and then I may go further and do the remake that people really hated, plus the TV series, which sounds like people are loving. I haven't seen all of these. I've seen the first one a few times. I've seen Cult and Curse, but I'm going to go through all of them. And it's the holiday season, so this is my holiday gift to Uncle Pete. Merry Christmas, dude, because I know that's what you celebrate. I'm kicking off the new year for you this way, and every Saturday it'll be a review of one of these 7 films until I'm done, and then, like I said, I might continue a little bit. So let's get into talking about Child's Play. Directed by Tom Holland, who also did Fright Night, which I love, Fatal Beauty, some Tales from the Crypt, The Temp, The Langoliers TV show, an episode of Masters of Horror, and the film, very underrated, Thinner. That's a great film. Written by Holland as well as John Lafia, who also wrote The Blue Iguana, Man's Best Friend, as well as Don Mancini. He's the big name, and he's actually stayed involved with all of these films throughout the franchise. Mancini also wrote scripts for Cellar Dweller, Child's Play 2, Child's Play 3, Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky, Curse of Chucky, Cult of Chucky, Hannibal. He did some episodes of the show Hannibal, which is a great show, and Channel Zero, which is also pretty fun. The original script for this apparently had Chucky being named Buddy, I believe, and coming to life when my autocorrect messed it up. And coming to life when some of Andy's blood got on him. He then came to life at night and ended up killing adversaries of Andy. That would have been interesting as well, but I think the way that the film ended up going was better for what it is. I mean, obviously, it's easy to say that because that's what we got. Picturing it the other way could have been good too, though. Mancini's apparently stated that his script originally kept the audience wondering if Andy is the killer for much longer within the film. I mean, if you consider it within this film, they set it up immediately that there's going to be a possessed good guy's doll. And then we find out, oh, it's named Chucky. And so as a viewer, you're in on it from the get-go. Apparently in the original script, though, they kind of played it like, oh, is Andy actually the killer? Which, you know, that may have been a better way to go, in my opinion, as far as, like, the suspense and the mystery of it all. But then I guess after you see it the first time, it's probably not going to have the same level of impact. But if you think about how the script was going to be that way, and you watch this film, or just think back to the film, because, you know, people like Uncle Pete probably remember every scene and every line of dialogue for the most part, just play it in your head and realize that there are a lot of moments that if they had played it that way, you can see where the adults would think that Andy is potentially actually the killer, and a lot of characters act that way. There were many animatronic versions of Chucky made, and in some scenes he's actually played by a little person. They did a wonderful job of kind of getting all the movements, all the motion out of Chucky that they really needed throughout the film, including using a live person at times. And obviously that's a little more tricky because that person's going to be bigger than the actual doll, so you have to kind of shoot it far enough away that they don't look too large. But they handled it extremely well within this film, and I'll talk about a few key moments having to do with the animatronic or the, you know, non-animatronic Chuckies. Original title for this film was Batteries Not Included. And then they found out that there was a Spielberg film that was going to be called that, and they're like, okay, never mind, we can't do that, because literally there's that moment. It points to that moment where the batteries are found out to not be inside the Chucky doll, and that's like a huge moment, but I'll talk more about that in a minute. Then it was called Blood Buddy, which Child's Play's better. I'm just going to say that. Child's Play's better. Not only does the opening sequence of this film let you know how bad Charles Lee Ray is, but it sets the expectation that a Chucky doll will be evil. There will be a Chucky doll, and then we know exactly which one it is or which home it's going to be in, because right after that opening sequence where Charles Lee Ray is, running from the law, he does his little incantation, his ritual, and puts his soul into a Chucky doll. Right after that, after we get all that set up and the toy store explosion, we go right to Andy and his mother, Karen. And so we know, because they did that, okay, this is where this doll's going to end up. I like how Ray, I'm just going to call him Ray from now on. I don't want to say Charles Lee Ray every time, because go by his last name. I like how Ray's dark ritual causes an epic explosion of the toy store. That's one hell of a spell. Packs a lot of punch, an explosive punch, obviously. That is... I was just like, the first time I saw it, I was just like, wow, okay, I wasn't expecting, the lightning striking, fine, maybe cause a fire somewhere, maybe cause a small explosion, but that explosion was, woo. Andy's introduction shows that he could use a best friend like Chucky, also that he's on his own at a good amount of the time, so being alone with Chucky later ends up feeling a lot more dangerous when it comes to the viewer's perception of what's going on. They literally set Andy up as not really having any friends, being left alone a good amount because, his mother's a single mother. So he's really on his own, and he's just kind of like opining to have an actual buddy. So you can see that very early on, that like he needs this buddy. But then it makes it so much more dangerous of a situation, because as a viewer, you know that the buddy he's going to end up getting, and eventually does end up getting, is going to have the spirit of a killer in it, and that makes it even more dangerous. But then it makes it more dangerous because there's a lot of time when Andy's kind of by himself, or kind of almost by himself, so it puts him in a lot of danger. Andy making breakfast in bed for his mom endears him more to the audience. It shows he has a very kind heart, so that's important. Obviously characters that are going to end up being in danger, you want the audience to feel for them, to feel scared about the situations they're in. So really early on, kind of endearing characters to people is what really helps. And him making the breakfast for his mother, everyone, is just kind of like, oh, it's so nice. He's such a good kid. So then you care more, because you're like, oh, he's a good kid. He's not a bad kid. Then Karen ends up being endeared to the audience when she end up paying $50 for that good guy doll just because Andy wants it so much. You see that and you're like, oh my gosh, she would do anything for her kid. Like, that's so sweet. So at this point, and it's pretty early on in the film, you really are attached to Andy. You really are attached to Karen. And that's what the filmmakers need from you at that point. It makes those suspenseful and dangerous moments feel more impactful. So they do a good job with that. The lines Chucky says sound creepy because as a viewer, you end up knowing that he's possessed. Now, I'm talking about the lines in the beginning before he switches over to Charles Lee Ray's actual voice. It's not creepy to the characters, obviously, because they just think, this is the default voice for this doll. But as a viewer, you know what's going on. So it comes off as creepy. And it is one of those things where if we didn't know at this point what was actually going on, if we didn't have that whole opening sequence, you may look at the doll and be like, oh, well, it's, that's just the voice of the doll. It's not creepy at all. They build good tension when Maggie is checking things out in the house while Chucky's on the loose. They do a good job of that with the score. The score is really well constructed for that moment. How they draw it out and how they give you enough moments where you feel like something could end up happening but doesn't. Also, like the little glimpses you get of Chucky, like him kind of running past in the background. You don't really see him that well. And then, the hammer being picked up, all those types of things. You don't see him too much. So it really well-constructed scene. Is it just me, or does anyone else think that a hammer to the head from Chucky wouldn't send you reeling back with enough force to send you through a window? I mean, if it was an open window, maybe, but it was a closed window. She ends up crashing through the glass and the wood partitions in it as well. It just seemed very over the top, in my opinion. Just, a small thing. Small thing I see there. You feel the uh-oh moment for Andy when he sees the flour on the bottoms of Chucky's shoes. That's another one of those key, like, oh my gosh, uh-oh, really hits you with impact moments, in addition to the battery one later that I'll talk about. But at that point, Andy knows what's up, especially because he's kind of piecing that together with the things that Chucky's been saying to him and only him. And you then know, as a viewer, it's going to be really hard for Andy to get the adults to listen to him. Because young children have wild imaginations, he's just a child, and they're going to be like, this isn't something that happens in reality, you know? So you feel even worse for Andy at that point, because you're like, he can't really convince anyone of what's going on. Gotta love the Chucky POV shots. Very Evil Dead-esque. You know, Evil Dead started this whole thing where people like doing those POVs. POV obviously working extremely well in this film, especially because it's from that lower perspective of, you know, the actual height of the Chucky doll. Day one of Andy taking Chucky out of the house when he goes to school leads him to wandering some dangerous streets, going to a dilapidated house, and almost being blown up. Because that's when Chucky takes out his old buddy Eddie, when he turns the gas on in that dilapidated house and then has him end up shooting at him. Well, he thinks he's shooting at him, and then that causes spark, blows the whole thing up. But Andy got really close to that house. He was kind of wandering around, so he could have been in danger. So immediately once he leaves the house with Chucky, lots of danger. So it obviously gives you the idea that Chucky has a lot of influence on Andy at this point. So that's just another aspect of danger. The moment those batteries fall out of the good guy box, you feel that moment of dread as Karen does. And it's how they shot it, how they keep the camera on it for so long, then Karen's reaction, and then everything after that is so tense. Even though if you kind of take the battery portion away from it, you take the music away from it, it's not that tense. But how they constructed that whole sequence, very tense. Because at that point, you know that Karen knows what's really going on, or at least suspects it. And you also know that most likely Chucky knows that Karen knows at this point. So he's going to be more likely to actually act out, start doing something, and that becomes the case. The moment when Chucky rolls under the couch, super creepy. I saw something where they had to like slant the floor and everything. It took them a long time to actually get that shot right. And then Karen picking him up seems like a really terrible idea after that happens, because you're like, okay, he's like in go mode, he's coming to life, let's not do this. Yeah. Tense moment. Chucky actually talking in Ray's voice and those sinister facial expressions just really take things to that next level. It goes from Chucky looking, you know, pretty normal, not too threatening, even though we know he is, to looking threatening, because the way his face kind of like grimaces when he talks, and that really evil sounding voice that we know is Charles Lee Ray's, it just takes it up a big notch, in my opinion. And then they take it up more notches, and I'll kind of comment about that in a little bit. This is one of those films that uses people who are homeless to signify crime and danger. Now, I understand this was a very, you know, common thing in this time period, but since I'm reviewing the film in 2022, I do want to kind of point out that that's not a great thing. And I'm glad we've started to get away from that stuff, because just using homeless people on a street to signify, oh, there's crime and danger here, that's not good, because you don't know the situations of what a person is going through. You don't know why they're homeless. And the other thing is, just because someone is homeless does not mean they are dangerous or that they're involved in crime or any of that stuff. So just something I felt I needed to kind of comment on. It does feel weird that Andy is a big focus for quite some time, and then he's kind of missing for a large chunk of the film. I mean, I get it, like they put him in that kind of mental institution for kids to be monitored, but he's just like such an important part of it that I feel like they should have at least checked back in on him periodically to see what he was doing. I don't know, it just feels really weird for him to be missing for such a large chunk of the film. I was just found myself being like, what is Andy doing? I like how for some reason it takes Norris a lot of time to try using the brakes when he's fighting Chucky in his car. That was one thing to me. I was just like, I mean, obviously the brakes really weren't working at that point because Chucky was able to get under there and like hit the gas, but he didn't try to actually hit the brakes until he was well into the scuffle. And I was just like, this is one of those like writing for convenience type things that, you know, it can take you out of it a little bit when you're watching it nowadays. But, you know, people didn't used to watch films this way and be like, that wouldn't happen in real life. That's just something that's kind of started over the last decade or so. Well shot scene in the overturned car with Norris, especially when you see Chucky's hand slowly grabbing the knife behind him when he's kind of like upside down, and you feel trapped in there and somewhat claustrophobic with him, and he's just able to see like Chucky running around, and then that awesome scene where it's like on his face and right behind him over his shoulder you see Chucky's hand kind of slowly reach in, you know, wrap his fingers around the handle of that knife and pull it out, and you're like, ugh, he's in trouble. But that's an excellent scene. Love the way they shot that. They didn't really need to explain the voodoo aspect of what happened in this film, but it does give kind of cool depth of story to it, so I appreciate that. When it came up, I was like, oh, they really didn't need to do this, but it's kind of cool and nice that they have done this because it, you know, gives people a why, and it's not a stupid reason. Because I'm sure there were some people being like, how does he know all these rituals? How was he able to like do all this chanting and put his soul inside of a doll's body? So that's nice. The doctor being electrocuted to death, that's really lame. I mean, let's be honest. As far as like 80s films go that are horror, it's very low on the blood. Actually, do you really even see much of any blood? I think you just see someone after they've been cut. But there's not really much gore or viscera to it, but it still feels scary. Like, I feel like this film doesn't necessarily need it. But I will say, the electrocution death, really lame. I hated that one. I like how, as Chucky is becoming more human, they make him actually look more human by defining his facial features a little bit more, and also that little touch of slicking his hair back. It starts to make him more human, because in the beginning, when you see him, he looks very, you know, like from the factory, like a doll for a kid, and he looks innocent. But as things change, like I said, you know, the grimaces of his face when they switch to Charles Lee Ray's voice, that makes him look more human. Then they start adding just more like facial lines to the sculpting of the face as he's actually becoming more human, because that's something the voodoo guy John says, that, you know, as he's in this body longer, he becomes actually more human, and then eventually a human heart forms, and that's how you're actually able to kill him, is by destroying his human heart. So I love that touch. And then, like I said, the slicked back hair, which is obviously not something that would be done to a doll. It's very human. Throughout the entire final fight, Chucky looks and acts like a true nightmare. And it's at its peak when he's all burnt and melted. Which, by the way, that whole fire sequence, the whole, like, pretty long sequence for what it is, I thought that it was going to be way more brief. That's phenomenally shot. It looks great. It looks terrifying. It looks crazy. And you're just like, okay. Like, we're taking care of Chucky here. He's going to be done. He's going to be down for the count. But he's not, because with a lot of these films back then, they usually get up another time. Or in Chucky's case, they get up a few times, which is kind of funny. But, yeah, I mean, he looks terrifying, especially when he's all melted. It's a nightmare. They did a wonderful job, practical effects-wise, within this film. I just put down, man, that doll's really hard to kill. And that's great, because it sets it up for films to come in the franchise that, you know, it's believable that he'd keep coming back, because he is so hard to kill at this point. Plus the whole voodoo aspect. You're like, you know, it'll happen. I like the touch that as Chucky is dying, his voice changes back to the factory default. It actually shows that Charles Lee Ray's spirit is kind of leaving that kind of dead body now. So that's a way that you don't have to say it to the audience. You can just kind of show it. It was a clever way to do it. I think it works very well. The demon has been exorcised. Just some final things to say about this film. Kids have very big imaginations, so it's easy to see why Andy isn't really believed by adults within the film. But as a viewer, you get frustrated with it because you know that he's telling the truth about Chucky. And I feel like that's a great aspect to the viewer experience with the film, is like you are getting frustrated because you're like, listen to him, he's right, he knows what's going on. So then you get this bit of relief, but not too much, when Karen, starts to get on the right path, and you're like, oh, okay, now he's going to be believed. Toy safety concerns grew over the decades, and this film plays into those parental fears of a product that looks fun and harmless, but is really dangerous for your child. I mean, just think about how things have come up over the decades about, oh no, this could be a choking hazard. Oh no, there's, this terrible thing that goes into making this toy. We've had a lot more awareness as time's gone on about potential issues with toys that are supposed to be safe for kids and are supposed to be, just fun and innocent. And I think this film kind of plays off those fears of what happens if you get a toy that your kid really likes, and it seems totally harmless and good for the kid, but it turns out to have a problem. It turns out to be bad for their health. And in this instance, because it's actually evil and going to try to kill them. You as well as the parent. Chucky also symbolizes negative outside influences on kids, if you consider that. And Karen's struggle is that of keeping her son from being corrupted. If you notice, he's not really out on his own. He's very much by himself. He has a kind of sheltered life in a sense, because he's never outside. When we're first seeing him, he's never really outside of their apartment, and until he goes out to school and then ends up ditching school with Chucky. And at that point, you're seeing that negative influence. So here's a toy that was brought in from the outside, that was purchased from a man who was homeless in a back alley, symbolizing kind of, the outside world being brought in, and it's having this tainting effect on Andy. It's making him do things that he normally wouldn't do. And that's just playing off the fears of parents looking at their kids and being like, I want them to stay, innocent. I want them to stay a good person. But eventually outside forces get in, and outside influence gets in, and your child is going to change. And people go through times of doing something wrong here and there, making mistakes, doing something terrible, but hopefully realizing that they did that and making amends for it and fixing things going forward. But I think this film does a good job with kind of playing on those types of fears of the outside influence of things, and that's what Chucky kind of embodies, in my opinion. It's the worst of society. Last thing I want to say, Alex Vincent does a really outstanding job playing the character of Andy. I mean, the whole cast does a really good job. Obviously, Brad Dourif does an amazing job with the voice of Chucky. So much so that he was the voice of Chucky for almost all the films in the franchise, except for, I think, the remake, which was Mark Hamill. But I mean, Alex Vincent, you got to consider how young he was and how good his acting was at this point. Like, we don't consider that so much. We tend to take that stuff for granted, but really think about that. He did an excellent job. So, out of 5 stars with half stars in play, it's an effective film. It's quite well done. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 stars. I was thinking, I was between 4 and 3.5, but there's enough kind of like subtextual stuff and the practical effects, and a lot of stuff is really well executed within it. So I'm going to bump it to the 4, but no, I was, kind of in the middle between 3.5 and 4, but I'm going to do 4. So hopefully people enjoyed this, especially Uncle Pete. I'm going to get going. It's going to keep happening. So hopefully people are excited for this one. Put some comments down here. Let me know your thoughts on this film. Love it, hate it, in between. Give me a sentence or two about it. And do me a big favor. Hit subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. It's quick, painless, costs you nothing, and I appreciate it greatly. Also hit the notification bell button, because then you'll know when I'm putting up new videos, which I'm doing at least 4 a week at this point. So I'm putting in work. But regardless, thank you very much for checking out this video. And until next time, keep it brutal.